Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and guitar gladiators, guitar warriors, guitar players, metal fans. This is episode 3 of the Metal Guitar Academy podcast, and I am your host, Brett Miller. Now, this episode, you're going to have to go on a bit of a mathematical journey, and please keep in mind that math is simply not my strong suit, and that is an understatement. But what I've attempted to do today is to find out how people are monetizing Spotify and Apple Music. And this is something that always interests me. I like to get down to the nuts and bolts of things, and also I like to be somewhat contrarian with prevailing thought patterns, because I think a lot of people will just sort of parrot things that they hear, and it just becomes their opinion without them really thinking about it. So what I'm going to attempt to do today is to make an argument that, in fact, the streaming situation for musicians can actually be a good long-term monetary strategy. Because the prevailing idea right now with most musicians is, the streaming stuff, that's just the biggest ripoff in the world. They're just stealing from everybody. They're giving people nothing in return. I used to think that too, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate here a little bit, because I still do kind of think that intuitively. However, I've run some numbers. I've had a little fun looking into this for, about half an hour before this, which, again, gives you an idea of what we're talking, probably about a sliding scale here. So this is not going to be gospel, but I think this is some common sense figures that we can glean from available information, as well as some common sense and some simple math. So these numbers could be wildly out of proportion, and I would, of course, love to hear from any of these people that I'm referencing today as sort of the guinea pigs, but I probably won't, unless their accountants are listening, which they probably are not. So here we go, right? Okay, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be equating Spotify and Apple Music, which, again, is not totally accurate. Okay, we just have to go with approximations here today. And Spotify is going to pay out a little bit less to people on average, Apple a little bit more, but we're going to, for the sake of keeping this somewhat simple and somewhat easy to follow, we're going to assume that the numbers I'm doing for Spotify are the same for Apple. Okay, if you look at really what it is, Spotify pays per stream about 0.003 cents. So that's pretty bad, right? Upon first hearing that. If you look at the latest figures, Apple Music is something like 0.005 maybe. So it is more. But we're going to be equating those pretty much at the Spotify level, and I'm going to be making the assumption that the listeners are approximately the same number on Spotify as they are Apple. So the figures I'm getting for Spotify, we're essentially just going to double and say, okay, these people are probably getting this on Apple Music at this point. Okay, so again, the prevailing narrative with most musicians is, oh man, Spotify is so cheap, Apple Music is so cheap, you get nothing. Well, we're going to be using, again, as our case study today, Joe Satriani, because, hey, this is a guitar podcast, right? So Joe Satriani, here's a guy who's been around forever. He has quite the catalog. He's really well known amongst guitar players. He's probably going to be these guys who's probably going to have about the same level of a fan base, probably for a long, long time, right? Because a lot of guitar players get into them. So the thought process here that I went through was, okay, I'm going to go look at on Spotify Joe Satriani's most popular songs, because if you go to those sites and those apps and you put an artist in, you will kind of see, oh, these are the most popular songs, and they give you, Spotify does, a number of listens to those songs. Now, unfortunately, as far as I can see, you can't drill down and put a specific album in and have Spotify show you, how many listens for that album. So again, we are fudging the numbers a bit. We're doing some approximations. But in terms of Joe Satriani, right? If we look at his most popular song, which, as you can probably imagine, if you are familiar with him, is Surfing with the Alien. And that record came out way back in, I want to say, 87. Okay? So that's by far his popular record and his most popular song. Now, doing the math, we are able to say that you get about $3 from Spotify per 1,000 plays. Okay, so we're going to be talking about per 1,000 here to, again, keep this easy. So $3 approximately you would get from 1,000 plays. Now, again, I'm not going to go into the weeds here about, how many. Let's say someone's putting a record out, right? Let's say Satch, Joe Satriani, his nickname is Satch. Let's say that he's even getting like $2 per record, classically, before all the streaming stuff. Let's say you buy a Satch record, he maybe ends up with $2. And even that's, probably stretching it. But let's say that. Well, you'd have to have the equivalent of 1,000 songs worth of listens, right? To get just that one record sale. So this is why the numbers upon first hearing them just sound like such a ripoff, right? Like, because frankly, I've got my Joe Satriani playlist on Spotify. I'm never going to have to buy a Joe Satriani record ever again. I'm just being honest. I'm probably not gonna, because why would I? I spend $10 a month on Spotify. So as a consumer, this stuff is fantastic. As a fan, it's fantastic, right? But I'm not going to buy another Joe Satriani record. Sorry. I'm just probably not. So if you think of it that way, it really seems like a ripoff, right, to the musicians. But let's dig a little bit deeper here. If you are someone like him, or another band that has an extensive catalog, and let's be clear, who owns their own material. I don't know what the ownership rights are for Joe Satriani, whether he's ever bought his catalog back or what. I don't know, okay? But if you are a band or a musician who has a fairly extensive catalog and you own the rights to your music, the streaming starts to look quite a bit better for you as a long-term financial strategy. Okay. So we're looking at Surfing with the Alien, right? The most popular song from that is Surfing with the Alien, the title track. Spotify is telling me that it's been streamed about 18 million times. As you look at other songs from that record, in that short list of his popular songs that give you numbers, the numbers do go down. I mean, you're not going to have that many streams for all the songs on that record. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take an average, I'm going to be conservative and say, let's say 10 million plays per song for Surfing with the Alien. And that's what we're really going to have to do throughout this talk here. It's going to be an approximation, right? So, but let's stick with it. So let's say it's about 10 million plays per song. Now there's 10 million, it's just 10 million. Well, that's a long record. There are 10 songs on the record. So that one record so far has earned approximately $300,000 on Spotify for Mr. Joe Satriani. Okay. Again, we're going to double that to say Apple Music we'll make the assumption, and again, assumptions make an ass out of you and me, right? So it's not good to assume. However, for our purposes, we're assuming he's making the same amount on Apple Music, which means that one record, since streaming has been a thing, Mr. Satriani has made approximately $600,000 for that record in earnings. Now, again, does he keep all of it? I don't know. Depends who owns it. Blah blah blah. Right? But that's earned $600,000. Okay. Now, if we look at this a little bit in more detail, Spotify has been around for about 12 years. Okay? So that means on Spotify, for the past 12 years, he's made, if we do the spread, approximately $25,000 a year with this one record. Apple Music has been around for 5 years, so let's say he's making $60,000 per year with that one record. Grand total, about $85,000 a year over the last 12 years for that one record. Okay, not bad. Not bad. Now, if we then extrapolate, again, this is not probably, hugely correct here, but it's going to give us an idea. On Spotify, Satch has about 24 records, okay, in his catalog, give or take a couple, from what I could see. Now, again, we're going to be very conservative here because Surfing with the Alien is certainly his most popular record. So we cannot just assume by any stretch of the imagination that all of his records are going to do that well, just because of the listening habits of people, right? So you take something he did in 2001 or something, like Engines of Creation. There's no way in hell that's coming even close. There's just no way. Okay, again, it does. I can't look at the numbers on Spotify. It doesn't tell me. But common sense would dictate that there's no way in hell that's coming anywhere close as his most popular record. So I'm going to be conservative and probably not conservative enough, but I'm going to go down from $600,000 total for the Surfing with an Alien record on streaming to about $100,000 per one of his other records. Okay, so that's a significant decrease, and I think that takes into account the fact that it's not going to be anywhere near as popular as most of his other records, right? So let's assume here that his 24 other records are going to have earned him $100,000 total. We're talking over the 12 years here for both Spotify and Apple Music. Okay. Now that is still $100,000 times 24. Okay, 100,000 times 24. That's going to be $2,400,000. Okay, $2,400,000. Not bad. Again, you start looking at this as a long-term strategy. If you're putting out a lot of music, if you have an existing fan base, okay. So this is for Apple and Spotify. Okay? So what does that mean? That's approximately, okay. What do we got here? Close to $300,000 a year if you average that around 12 years. Okay, if you take that. So break this down even further. That's about $25,000 a month. If we're taking his earnings so far from streaming over the last 12 years, and I'm sure it's gone up as streaming has gone up in popularity, right, in terms of it's probably hockey sticked over the last number of years, but if we just do the spread, right, we can say that Joe Satriani may have been making $25,000 a month just from streaming. Again, that's pretty damn good for someone like a Joe Satriani. Let's face it, this is not Metallica, this isn't Madonna, this is not the Beatles, It's a guitar guy who your average person probably has never heard of. Your average guitar player these days, maybe not even. You get younger people, Okay? It's not bad. And that's because he has such a big catalog and he has a fan base that's going to consistently listen to him, right? Okay? $25,000 a month. Now let's compare that to pre-streaming. Let's be really, really generous. And this is probably being too generous. Let's say that Mr. Satriani would have been taking in $3 per record sold. And again, I think that's probably overestimating. Okay? That means he would have had to sell over consistently every year after year 100,000 units to make what he, according to our numbers here, as fudgy as they may be, to have made the same amount that he's been making over the last 12 years with streaming. Now, that's highly unlikely to happen. Someone like a Satriani is not going to be selling 100,000 records consistently year after year for that long. No, it's not going to happen. Okay, so the streaming for someone like him, it's working out pretty good. Okay. Now this brings us to something that I find pretty interesting. Now, again, this is a little bit of math jujitsu here, but there is a way that we can make a comparison now, okay, to other people on Spotify. Because check this out. Spotify will also give you the number of listeners per month. Now, this can fluctuate, but again, if you have someone that's fairly well-known, established, whatever, it's going to remain about approximately the same. Not too different, right? So if we look at Satriani, Spotify is telling me that he's got about 650,000 monthly listeners. Okay? Now again, if we double that and we assume that Apple Music is the same, that's 1,300,000 monthly listeners. Now, if you do the math to what he's been earning, if our figures are anywhere near correct, which again I say they may not be, but it's so far pretty logical, right? I'm just following what's available here to me publicly. That gives us an approximate value, and I find this very interesting, an approximate value of each listener, not stream, each listener, at about 2 cents per month. Okay? So, if he's got 1,300,000 listeners, each of those listeners is worth, monetarily, about 2 cents per month. Now, what's interesting about that is that is going to be a figure that ostensibly we could use across the board to put a monetary value on any listener, okay? Any listener on Spotify and Apple. Remember, it's a combination, okay? It's a combination. I like that because it's really easy and fast to get a snapshot of pretty much anybody, what their monthly listeners are. You know, anywhere from, 100 listeners a month to, 41 million or whatever, So let's look at a few examples here. Let's look at a few examples. Now, again, maybe I'm completely full of crap. I don't know, but makes sense to me intuitively that this is about right. It's about right. Because let's say you're someone and you've got, you've got 2,000 listeners a month. Okay? And let's face it, that's a lot of bands. There's tons of awesome bands that are out there, especially in metal, that it's not like they're popular, So if we do this, I'm bringing up my calculator, we've got 2,000 listeners per month. We're going to multiply that by 0.02. So that's like $40 a month. Now, just from experience and knowing people and talking to people, and that feels about right. Okay? Now, this is what I'm talking about. If you're someone that is having that level of listeners, and maybe you have not a really huge fan base, and you don't have 24 records out and all this stuff. I mean, that's nothing, right? $40, and again, these are probably inflated figures, let's be honest, that I have here. But you're a band, right? Let's say there's 5 people in the band. You're now making, as a band, $40 a month from having 2,000 listeners. And now you're splitting that $40 between 5 guys. And maybe you have a label, maybe you don't. Let's say you're putting out your own stuff. Spotify becomes almost a non-entity for you to even focus on, right? But you start having a long-term career, you have a catalog, this is where things change. And I think the trouble here is, I think most people that are doing the complaining about Spotify, they're in this tier that I was just talking about, where they're literally seeing nothing, or less than nothing. You divide that up between 5 people, and it really does seem frustrating. Okay, but if you look at this long-term strategy and you say, hey, listen, if I keep doing this for 10 years, putting records out, we grow our fan base, if streaming continues to be the thing, which I don't see why it wouldn't over the next 10 years, probably that or some similar type of model will be there. You really can build over time, and this can become essentially an investment, okay? Because you get those recurring listeners, right? And you build some new people. You will start to see a greater amount coming in year after year. Now, let's take a few other examples. Because we now have this, again, ostensibly, a monetary value of 2 cents per listener for your monthly Spotify listener, right? Let's take a Frank Zappa. Now, Zappa personally is one of my heroes musically. Not only do I like most of the music. By the way, if anybody ever says that they like everything that Frank Zappa ever did, they're full of crap, and they just haven't heard it, because with so many records like Zappa has, okay, it's not all good. I mean, there's some stuff in there that I really dislike. But on the whole, Zappa's just an amazing musician, right? He was an amazing musician, great satirist, really funny guy, very intelligent guy. But what I like about him a lot is, I mean, you talk about the buzzword has always been the indie, independent artist, indie music, indie musician. Well, this guy was independent way before any of that stuff was even a thing. He owned the rights to all his stuff. If he didn't, he bought it back as quickly as he could. He had his own company that he would pay his musicians' salary, and they would go out and tour, and he'd use the money from that tour to pay the salaries for the coming. So this guy really knew what he was doing from a business standpoint. And so at this point, it's almost guaranteed that his estate just owns the rights to everything, right? So take someone like a Zappa, or now his estate, unfortunately. If we put the monetary value of 2 cents per listener, that estate is getting about $40,000 per month. Again, not bad. And this is Zappa. This is not the Beatles, right? Now, if we take that same formula and we look at some garbage like Cardi B, a pop person, okay? And this is the stuff they're just shoveling out, but whatever. Very popular person, that's why I'm picking this, right? Very popular pop person. If we do the 2 cents per listener, right now, Cardi B is at $820,000 per month through streaming revenue for Spotify and Apple Music. $820,000 per month. Now, we do have to temper that by saying, A, this is not a long-term person. So this is not a Zappa or a Satriani who is going to have 24 records, right? Or more. Not going to happen. So, she's riding the wave, whatever, stretched over time, plus the fact that, again, let's be generous. Let's say that she personally is maybe touching like 10% of that because, she's got to be owned, 6 ways to Sunday with all the people that have hands in her pockets, right? So let's be generous and say that 10% of that she's actually, taking home. That's $82,000 a month. So again, you compare someone who's just got an unbelievable amount of listeners like her. It's only about twice as much per month as the Zappa estate is taking in. But the Zappa estate is going to grow that while our unfortunate Cardi B, that's only going to go down over time. Let's face it. So, and not just her, I'm not just picking on her, but any pop, if this was, if we equate her to like MC Hammer, for a while, MC Hammer was making just an unbelievable amount of money. But, we look at what's happened to him because he just doesn't have staying power. None of these pop people really do. Okay, so in terms of long-term strategy, slow and steady wins the race here with the streaming. Okay. So I do find it encouraging that to look at it from this different angle, right? Instead of just taking the position that everybody does as their knee-jerk reaction, oh, streaming is horrible for the artist. It's it's just a big corporate thing, and it's like, well, no. If the numbers here are anywhere near reality, it can be looked at as an investment in your career to keep putting out records, to grow your fan base, but real fans, ones that are going to be listeners. Listen, I listen to Joe Satriani fairly regularly. Again, I'm never going to buy another record, but I'm also never going to stop listening to him on the streaming. So I'm one of the little, out of the million cogs in the wheel here, contributing to Joe Satriani's monthly income, and I'm not going to stop. So again, it's neat to look at these things after doing some actual research, as surface perhaps as it was. I think it's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool to come at this other direction. Okay. So that's it for today. I'm not a math guy, but I like talking about money. I like talking about and theorizing, people in the industry that I'm in, speculating on how well they're doing and talking to people. I find all that interesting, and I think it's something that the more transparent that is, and the more awareness there is about that, I think it helps people decide if they have what it takes to even to want to get into something like this, because it's not a flash in the pan thing. You have to be able to weather the storms because you do well sometimes you don't. But I do think it's fun. I think it's fun to talk about it, and I appreciate you guys checking this out with me. Hopefully you didn't get too bored with the math stuff, but if you're a music fan, you probably like the streaming stuff. Even if you're a musician and you have your stuff on there, maybe you do well with it, maybe you don't. I don't know, but I know you like using the service, and as a consumer, it's the best $10 a month that I could possibly spend because I can listen to anything that I want. So there you go, folks. Until next time, this is Brett Miller with Metal Guitar Academy, and this has been the Metal Guitar Academy podcast.